The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free.
Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Right now I'm going to attempt to examine the Bible and dissect some of the churchy language we can easily take for granted, digging into history and languages as I'm able anyway to try and get at the heart of the text so that we can hopefully see and then apply at least some of what God has for you and me in these words today. Now, I'm not formally trained in Scripture. I'm just a guy using resources and a questioning mind to try and get at the truth, and that's something that we can all do, so I hope that you will do that with me. We've been studying through the book of Colossians and have arrived now at chapter 2, verses 20 through 23, which in the ESV says, "If with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the world, why, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch," referring to things that all perish as they are used, according to human precepts and teachings. These have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body, but they are of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. Okay, so we'll start with verse 20. "If with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the world, why, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations?" The Greek translated as the word "if" here, "if with Christ you died," actually communicates not uncertainty about the proposition, but sets it up as the basis for a logical argument. A translation that retains this sense intended might instead say, "Since with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the world," and then go on from there. The phrase "elemental spirits of the world" is the same here as used in verse 8, so it's worth going over again what we learned about it there. This phrase is translated as basic principles in the NIV. The original Greek here could have referred to basic principles of learning like ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, which would have then been an insulting way of calling them simplistic rather than truly advanced, as proponents of them would claim. However, its other possible meaning seems more likely in this particular context, in which it would be referring to, as the ESV translates it, elemental spirits of the world. The heresy at Colossae involved grouping Christ in with numerous spiritual beings that were equally viable alternatives. Paul also cautions against worship of angels in verse 18, and so this seems the most likely intended use of the Greek word, cautioning readers against adopting ideas that elevate the importance of other spiritual beings. So in verse 20, Paul seems to essentially be saying, since with Christ you became dead to the false spiritual ideas popular in the world, why, as if you still lived according to those ideas, do you submit to these regulations? Verse 21 and 22, I'll read together, say, "Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch," referring to things that all perish as they are used, according to human precepts and teachings. Here Paul characterizes these regulations in summary. The focus seems to be dietary, and given that the rising worldview in Colossae was a blend of legalistic Judaism and pagan ideas, the dietary restrictions could have come from the Mosaic Law, some pagan philosophy, or both. But by this time, Jesus had declared all foods to be clean. We see that in Mark 7:19. And here Paul, having just said that dietary regulations and festivals are mere foreshadows of the true realities to come, we saw that in Colossians 2:17, he underlines this by showing that these dietary regulations are about things that all perish as they are used, as opposed to the eternal realities that they foreshadow. He also identifies these regulations as merely human in origin rather than divine. Now, of course, the Mosaic Law did come from God, but at this point, to continue observing those regulations is something merely human in origin and motivation. And verse 23. These have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body, but they are of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. Now, the Greek word for flesh, I haven't mentioned this in our study series in a while, so I wanted to be sure and touch on this. The Greek word for flesh at the end of this verse is sarx, and it does not refer only to physical, biological matter. It's an expression referring to those elements in us that reflect the natural flow and state of broken humanity and a fallen world. You can see Galatians 5, verses 19 through 21 for examples of its use referring to non-physical qualities. Some translations translate the word sarx as sin nature. I think maybe the NIV does that. But an argument against that translation approach is the fact that we are told we have a new nature and are new creations in Christ, and that the old version of us is gone. So rather than thinking that we kind of have two natures, it's more accurate to see sarx in Christians, I think, as a remnant that clings to us. A very influential remnant, like tar that sticks to our body, and it's like a constant problem. It's constantly on our mind. If you were covered in sticky tar that dried on you, you'd be thinking about it and dealing with it virtually every moment of your life. So it would be this very pervasive part of your experience, but not actually part of who you are, or something that defines you in any way. And I think that is the better way to see this word. So back to verse 23, Paul was warning that despite their appearances, these various pious activities and regulations didn't really help people break away from sinful habits and tendencies. All right, so what's in these verses maybe specifically for us geeks to come away with? I read these verses and I think about interactions with people online, which as geeks, we sometimes do have more of those kinds of interactions than in-person interactions. Virtue signaling, very common online, got its name in the internet age, but it's been around as long as humans have. The natural tendency for both Christians and non-Christians is to try and morally justify ourselves before others and establish our moral goodness compared to others. And part of that attempt on our part can involve telling others, or I would say more often kind of implying by what we kind of announce or share regarding our own views. We kind of imply by some of these things we say online what we think other people should also be doing or agreeing with morally. But before we engage in that kind of interaction or posting in various places online, I think these verses point out something very important. Things that appear to be wise, pious, disciplined, self-sacrificing, and God-honoring on the surface may actually be worthless in their usefulness to a life lived with Yahweh. They may seem synonymous with passionate dedication, obedience, and self-sacrifice, but do they actually stop the activities of the sinful, worldly remnants that cling to not merely our actions, but our inner thought lives, from which our actions spring, as Jesus tells us? Works of the flesh in Galatians 5, 19 through 21 include, there's a big list of them. I recommend looking at all three of those verses, but among them include enmity, or we don't use that word often today. The idea, at least one key idea in that word is hostility, we would maybe say today. So hostility, strife, or we would more commonly say arguing, quarreling, that kind of thing, and division. So these ideas of hostility, being argumentative, and being divisive. And it's often been the case in my experience that Christians and non-Christians who call for others to adhere to unnecessary, unbiblical self-restrictions or commands and priorities, those folks are among, in my experience, the most hostile, quarrelsome, and divisive people that I interact with, especially online. And without them even realizing it, I think. So not only do morally legalistic life regulations not help us avoid sin, in my experience, I think they contribute to making us blind to our own sin. I think, and I'll get to that, to why that might be in a second here. I think it's important to add a footnote or kind of take a little rabbit trail here and note that although God does not call for all of us to avoid, say, XYZ, I'm not going to say something specific, but God may not call all of us to avoid XYZ. However, if we are yielding our hearts to God, we are bound to discover some kind of X, Y, and Z's in our lives that He wants us individually to abstain from because of how it may lead us to sin, how it may hinder our growth, or in other ways just kind of sidetrack us from what His specific will is for us. Going further down that rabbit trail for a moment, a temptation in those times of self-discovery when we realize, I got to get away from this, or I need to prioritize this. I think a temptation in those times of self-discovery, I've noticed this in myself, is to feel ashamed of our weakness and frustrated that we need to give something up. And we can then compensate for that feeling by resolving to hold others accountable to the same abstinence or command, since either because it feels unfair that we should have to give something up or do something that others don't, or we just kind of refuse to believe on like a subconscious level. I don't think these are conscious things, but we can just kind of almost on a subconscious level refuse to believe that we may actually be weaker and less mature than other believers around us. And the self-serving cherry on top is that by calling others to abstain from something that we consider sinful, we can kind of recover a sense of our own moral goodness relative to others. Oh, I'm helping people. I'm in this position of helping them rise up to this new moral standard that I've kind of discovered, to join me in that, The phrase putting the cart before the horse comes to mind as I think about this kind of stuff. Imposing a bunch of boundaries and rules on ourselves, while appropriate at times, will not naturally lead to a change in our hearts. That's putting the cart before the horse. But if we start with instead gratitude and love for God, and with a desire to understand ourselves and the world through Him, if we do that first and we're prioritizing that, we will find that our lives do change. Our perspectives, our feelings about things will change. I've noticed this in my life. And then both our thoughts and our actions will change. And on a much deeper, natural feeling and transformative level than we could try to bring about by manufacturing our own righteousness. If you'd like some help finding a good church in your area, I would love to help you do that if I can. Online resources and communities are good supplements, but by nature they just can't speak to your particular situation like relationships in a local church can. The context for almost everything in the New Testament assumes that we're serving and building purposeful relationships in a local church. So whether you're in a church that just kind of lacks Bible-based intentionality or maybe not attending any church at all, if I can help you get connected to an authentic, compassionate, Bible-oriented church, I want to do that. You can email me at paeter@spiritblade.com, and we can look at some websites of churches in your area together. It is time again for Christian Geek Central's annual Game Save event, fundraising for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which provides free treatment for children facing life or death circumstances and shares its cutting-edge life-saving research with hospitals all over the world. You're still welcome to join the Game Save team by following the link in the description below. And once again this year, I'm drawing attention to our team's fundraising by performing a 24-hour marathon of video gaming that I will stream live on youtube.com/Christian Geek Central beginning 6 a.m. Pacific Time on Saturday, November 5th. You can donate or get more info by clicking on my fundraising page in the links below, where you'll also find incentives and rewards for doing so. For $5, choose a topic for me to share my sometimes overly strong opinions on during my live stream. For $10, you get the previous reward and a download code for a free copy of the Spirit Blade Special Edition audio drama. For $20, you get the previous rewards and you can choose a game for me to play during my November 5th live stream, pick a favorite, or torture me with something terrible or rage-inducingly difficult. For $30, you get the previous rewards and you can choose a song for me to sing during my November 5th live stream, pick an old favorite of yours, or just make me humiliate and torture myself with something no one wants to hear. And for $50, you get the previous rewards and a download code for every MP3 product at spiritblade.com. That's a $90 value. On top of that, I have set fundraising milestones that will unlock strange and unusual happenings as I reach them. At $200, I'll have a free download day for everyone who visits spiritblade.com on November 12th. And as my total goes beyond $200, I'll unlock increasingly more content for the free download day. And depending on how far beyond $200 my fundraising goes, during my November 5th live stream, I will cover my face in peanut butter and jelly while talking about horror movies, put on a pair of frozen socks and a frozen t-shirt at the same time, shoot water up my nose with a turkey baster, and have my wife Holly play a video game with me for 30 minutes. And if I reach a personal fundraising total of $500 or more, I will resume and complete, before the end of the year, my live stream Let's Play series for Fallout New Vegas as a Terminator. I like your gun. attempting to do so in a single sitting. That could take as much as 20 hours or more based on howlongtobeat.com averages. We will find out together if I reach $500. Finally, if I reach my $500 goal by the end of Thursday, October 20th, I will do a 4-hour live stream before the end of the year, playing only the most frustratingly difficult games in my collection. Since my last Get Good live stream, I've added some more titles to the list that will probably be like beating my face against a wall, and you can bring that about if you help me reach $500 by the end of October 20th. Now, there are some stipulations and time limits on those rewards and milestones, so quickly follow the link below to my fundraising page for all the details. I hope you'll be a part of helping me and the Christian Geek Central Game Save team do some good for some kids who really need it. And then please join me at youtube.com/Christian Geek Central for my 24-hour marathon starting at 6 a.m. Pacific time on Saturday, November 5th. Hope to see you then.
Oh my gosh. This is all kinds of wrong.